began with a foul ball spray chart spanning 9 MLB games put together by the Baltimore Sun. We talked about factors that make the difference between ball flight distance off the bat of a big leaguer versus a teenager a relative wash. This data turned into a tool to measure where the most dangerous areas truly reside in a complex. We'll now put it to work in part 2. Take a good look at it. This is the current industry pariah that needs addressing. The rings around each one of these sample fields sure make a mesmerizing artistic pattern, but it's chilling to think about where this kaleidoscope of color aligns with where siblings of the players like to run around. Here's a hint, it's where there's a sizable overlap in each field's ring number 2. My taped interview with Professor Fried from part 1 has an even larger role to play in this discussion.
If you know a type of facility is having a lot of injuries, you don't want to do what they're doing. But if there are strategies or techniques that can be used that help reduce risk, and you can show this facility has incorporated, whether it's tree lines, additional fencing, additional distance between the fields, and you say, based upon that, we decided to incorporate those elements as a risk management effort in what we're doing, you're going to be in a much better position if there is, in fact, a suit at a later time.
So if that's a red ocean, foremost is going to swim away to this blue ocean example over here. Southeastern part of Michigan, 4 adult fields where the client expected to see a cloverleaf. Beyond the sun angle benefits, you can see what rings number 1 and 2 look like as collars on each field in our proposal. It's unprecedented how little overlap there is. From the earlier density discussion, you can also note a more concerted effort to align infields with adjacent outfields. It's simply playing the odds. MLB teams hit home runs about 1 every 27 plate appearances, while foul balls into the seats are about 1 every 3. If any spectator is going to be hit by something they didn't see, it's going to take a moonshot to dead center field. I'll bet each one of these fields only experiences that once in its lifespan. The parking lot becomes slightly more in range than a typical southwest-facing field would have, but if we're worried more about easily replaceable broken glass than broken bones, we've got our priorities seriously out of whack. We can certainly add some extra height or width to the netting system on this particular field, but if a client still has more concern over car risk than human risk, then it becomes a thank you for your time, we're not the right people for you discussion. This next example is only 2 fields, but serves as half a cloverleaf for analysis. It's here to show how every degree matters, and truly how awful it is to follow the trend of putting a parallel first baseline of one field to that third baseline of another. The distance between fences in the original plans called for 71 feet, which is already about 30 more feet than the average cloverleaf complex. That all means that what you see here is oftentimes much worse. Most notably, that is softball's home plate bleachers, and then the return fire on a baseball's home plate circle and third base coach's box. All are within the 150-foot first ring. Better invest in a bleacher cover, or make that first home game of the year umbrella giveaway night. Juxtapose that against our subtle turn of the diamonds. 27.6 degrees was all that was allowable on the tight site, but it's enough to remove that first level threat. It's honestly so easy to do, it just has to be done early. This is also a good time to note that fast-pitch softball and youth baseball use the radial ring number 1 of a big field as their ring number 2. Scaled down to their measurements, the greatest risk for those head-hunting foul line drives occur inside 150 feet. That's important as we return to western Nebraska and do a deep dive, this time with stand-in figures placed at random around the facility. For sake of the study, we'll label the fields 1, 2, 3, and 4 in this manner. We're going to hone in on the action on field number 3. Let's say there are 25 people in or in direct proximity to each bleacher, and 20 folks in the concession stand, restroom, press box, scouting perch. We'll say each field has 20 total people in the 2 dugouts, so not during a half-inning break. Add up all the extras and there's 237 people inside field number 3's dangerous 150-foot Pac-Man shape. It's tough to theorize what each one is paying attention to or doing, but it's fair to speculate 97 of them are watching the action on field 3, or at least in a position to slightly turn and locate a foul ball in under 500 milliseconds. Average human reaction time is 280. Most of these are under shelter or directly behind screening of some kind. And while that's decent, they aren't exactly the people we're worried about. At least not from field 3. It's the other 140 people that, ironically enough, have backstops on their own field to protect them from danger, and also plenty of time to react to such risks, but have the verbal warnings drown in ambient noise and ambiguity. How do you know this 9th "heads up" in the last hour is specifically meant for you? Maybe you don't have as much time to react as you thought. It's one thing to debate whether distracted teens on their phones, toddlers, or the extremely intoxicated should be sitting directly above the dugout in a big league stadium. That's one game and only one baseball to focus on. It's another thing entirely to create scenarios where 4 games are in play in this tight of a cluster. You could be the most attentive spectator at the park, able to catch anything hit your way with your bare hands, and still be at risk in a cloverleaf. There's just too many sides to protect all at once. And watching your intended game with head on a constant swivel isn't fun or stress-free. But for me, the issue is less about those seated comfortably into metal benches and folding chairs. Most places recognize the shortcomings of the cloverleaf and give these seats a roof. And even then, baseball and softball parents ditched the bleachers years ago. You're not a true supporter if you don't have your own tent to annoyingly butt up against the dugout in earshot of the coach. Calling them protected cuts that number from 140 down to 29. But of that 29, a majority are players, coaches, and umpires hung out to dry on another field, including the pitchers on field 2 and 4. This is major problem area number 1. Even at their most benign, foul balls belonging to others are highly disruptive, frequent, and easily avoidable pauses. Sure, they have gloves and helmets, but they're locked in on their game too much to truly defend themselves. And the small quantity standing here is awfully susceptible to the fastest and lowest line shots exiting the field of play. This is major problem area number 2, and it has all sorts of victim types. In this first mock-up, we're talking about members of a team on site for a game yet to even occur. They inevitably arrive an hour or more early to the complex and watch the game on their field from locations like these. Whether there's a batting cage present or not, these are the hot spots for the pregame hang. But they're not the only use group that's finding themselves in the crosshair. We're nervous about our children sitting at this distance and angle relative to home plate. We'll even write Congress to get further protectionary measures. I guess that's only for the big leagues, though. Because somehow we're fine with cloverleaf design requiring each visitor to enter and exit through a narrow gauntlet with nearly identical parameters to the tragic MLB stadium examples. In far too many cases, there's only a 6-foot fence to protect the people who are distractedly walking and talking in large groups. Worse, there's not 1 but 2 home plates where foul balls can originate. And let's not forget about the dreaded overthrow. After all, the very first MLB fan death came in 1943 when a throw from a third baseman sailed over its intended first base target. It's not talked about near enough, but this is a very dangerous path to walk, especially while the crossfire and catch lines of pregame warm-ups are happening on both fields simultaneously. Not a fun time for me to be 6'2". Let's bring back the foremost take on that Western Nebraska complex, and we'll run a comparison. For ease of understanding, we'll call these fields 1 through 4, which is where we'll begin. Right out of the gate, you can see fewer people in the Pac-Man radius, 84 to be exact. Most importantly, none of them are players, coaches, or umpires focused on a different game. With the rare exception of this relief pitcher right here, warming up in the fairly fortified bullpen. That's a far cry from the 237 total people and 16 players, coaches, or umpires on the other fields from the last example. Critics are going to say you skewed the data and cherry-picked a field on the perimeter instead of the busy interior of your site. Okay, let's go there. I added an extra set of bleachers and sprinkled in additional picnic tables. And I even threw in a first aid tent. Not that we'll need it for foul balls or heat stroke from synthetic turf. I really wanted to flex on all the things you can add when the area behind home plate is in a claustrophobic cattle farm. Count them all up, 157 people, most just in the rendering aimlessly walking as to not have the number be too low to be believable. This is the busy epicenter, and it's 80 fewer people than the Cloverleaf example. And only the right fielder over here is a player that isn't paying attention. But it would take a near home run in a negative direction at an angle that would surely be grabbed by the backstop. The best part is no pitcher has to flinch with every completed delivery as a prevention measure from someone else's batted ball next door. Part of this is personal to me. While coaching at one of the country's most prominent amateur complexes, I was hit by a foul ball in the third base coach's box. The liner over the dugout got me in the right forearm, and the unexpected nature of the ordeal knocked me to my knees. It took a moment for my brain to even process what had happened. The base umpire called time immediately in our game and sprinted over to me to help. He saw the whole thing but couldn't do very much to stop it. In the commotion of games like these, there's never going to be an instance where heads up from another field is going to get the attention of exactly the right person. And even so, having them look up to find that a ball is in imminent danger is not going to be in their best interest. And this is why the topic is less about injury and more about avoidable annoyance. I wasn't hurt, just honestly ticked off. But certainly not at the kid who hit the ball. Wasting a nasty 0-2 slider or just missing that outer half fastball isn't his fault. That's just the nature of the sport. If anything, he was doing a good job up at the plate. It's the environment to blame. No different than when a car stops your game of street hockey. I was terrible at hiding my frustration over these interruptions as a kid, and I'm likely worse about it now. The start and stop nature of baseball is killing its popularity. Sprinkling in 5 foul balls from another field per game sure isn't helping anything, whether it's a benign stoppage or not. And you might say, a ball bouncing harmlessly in the middle of a field, not striking anyone, isn't grounds to abandon a tried and true facility layout. Well, I witnessed quite the scene in Indiana back in 2015 that might change your mind. A game-tying 2 RBI double in the game right before ours was called back as a no pitch because a foul ball from adjacent field bounced halfway up the third baseline just before the pitch was released. I sided with the enraged coach who eventually got ejected. The ball from the adjacent field had no effect on the play. But the umpire in the field had it correct by the letter of the stupid house laws that now need to be written as addendums to the rulebook. All of this could have been easily avoided. Let the fields breathe and the game can return to being the game. It can even pay you back.
One of the biggest advantages for having a comprehensive risk management program in place is saving money. If you could show an insurance company you are doing everything proactively to minimize risk, that's where you could reduce what your insurance premiums might be. For example, if you bring in a document that shows, look at, we took X, Y, and Z steps. And it wasn't just something that we came up with, it was an external consultant came forward and said, these are the proper steps to help reduce the amount of claims. That's going to bode very well with an insurance carrier who could take a look at that and price your insurance more reasonably based upon the fact that they know that you are taking this seriously.
This strategy is the perfect sidecar to breaking up the cloverleaf. Because of the Picasso layout, you either didn't have to tear down as many existing mature trees, or you were presented with, upon completion of the field build, these fun little pockets to plant new ones. And they conveniently exist where foul balls spilling onto other fields would be at their most dangerous. Try this with a traditional arrangement and it's nearly impossible. The locations you want for foliage are consumed by pedestrian walkways. That means you're, again, relying heavily on nets and less on nature. Worse, you're inverting the purpose of backstops and fencing. They're designed to keep balls and bats in, not keep foreign projectiles out. They're not your anti-missile Iron Dome. Earthen mounds are another tactic we like to employ, especially around parking lots. Like high-end golf courses, it shields an unsightly sea of cars from the drive-in, but also raises the barrier in a natural way for foul balls to get over.
You can't prevent every foul ball from leaving. It's just not physically possible. You don't anticipate having netting that's going to be 40 feet up, at a small little ballpark. You might have it 20 feet behind the backstop, 30 feet maybe, depending upon the circumstance, and it might radiate and then gradually go down, but nothing like that surrounding the entire field unless it is close to where you're going to have people that might be parking or engaged in other activities. And that's why you look at the totality of the evidence. If it's a parking lot that's 60 feet away, you don't have that kind of concern. But if you have something that is 10, 15 feet away from the fence and you have people walking back and forth over there because it's a walkway, then you have to take more precautions to make it as safe as possible.
With the baseball rule under constant attack from its critics, it would behoove future athletic developments to study foul balls and make field layout and orientation decisions that didn't rely solely on expensive and obtrusive netting systems. These things are vital to operations, but should be supplemental to the more natural, more common sense strategies. Having said all that, you'll literally have to have a backstop. So where are you putting it? First off, we have some recommendations to consider. According to the industry's sacred text, the Ball Field Dimension Guide from Beacon Athletics. There you'll find any baseball game played by those 13 and older should have 60-foot distance from tip to brick. But you'll also notice this letter J is in blue, meaning the rule is highly flexible. And with the cunning use of the Pythagorean theorem, I'll show you why that's a good measurement to tweak. Let's say the backstop tops out at 30 feet, 60 feet from home. Assume the pitch fouled off was 3 feet above the ground at contact. This means your backstop is only capturing foul balls shallower than 24.2 degrees. Put another way, prepare yourself to hear the dreaded words "last ball in play" from the umpire a lot. How can this be? We started the game with a full dozen. Are the freshmen still looking for the ones from last inning? Of course you're going to lose foul balls like crazy. Math's not on your side in this design. We know all about launch angles these days, but what is it on average for foul balls? Turns out it's 22.72 degrees. At 60 feet, that average angle barely hits the net, just under 2 feet from the top. And I hate to break it to you, that means you're paying for a full netting system, but only using 6%. So what's the modern trend for sports architects to combat this? Well, cutting down the angle like a hockey or soccer goalie is a good place to start. That same 30-foot backstop, now placed 37 feet from home, does substantially better at keeping foul balls on this playing surface, capturing up to a 36.1 degree reverse launch angle. Run that same height net out beyond both dugouts, and you might just have that game ball used for first pitch survive all the way to final out. Sometimes you're just dealt a bad hand. Maybe you were the dealer, maybe it was an inherited situation out of your control. These are the extreme instances that warrant overprotective nets as long as they are the last resort. Such was the case for a small college facility in St. Louis. Before Foremost even existed, I attempted to shoehorn a shared baseball, softball, soccer, and lacrosse field into an urban site no bigger than a postage stamp. On the first base side, the immediate context was a busy 5-lane road. The third base side butts up against a large river. To reduce baseball-induced traffic accidents and prevent a bucket of balls from becoming unsexy versions of PNC Park splashdowns, we called for the king of all netting systems. With the base of the backstop already 8 feet off the playing surface, we went another 25 feet up, 105 feet down each line. The whole thing operates like it's a Topgolf facility. And plans like these work even better as the distance between home plate and the backstop shrink. But before you go thinking that's the magic variable to tinker with, we really need to pump the brakes. Closing in the walls like the Death Star trash compactor doesn't come without side effects. What you gain in foul ball retention is conversely lost in dugout and on-deck circle safety. And the other negative trade-off is frequency. Less foul ground, more foul balls that could have been outs. In 2017, 27.9% of MLB strikes were foul balls, an all-time high. That's largely due to the fact that big league fields lost an average of 5,500 square feet of foul territory compared to their stadium's predecessor. This new acceptable tolerance has trickled down to the local architects who are drawing amateur-level facilities. But like so many things in life, it's about finding the happy medium, and I'll show you what I mean. Here are 3 real-life examples for baseball fields with 90-foot bases. Note the distance from each home plate to its backstop and the unique geometries they create. I'll walk you through my infamous method of placing dugouts, which will prove that only the Foremost example meets what should be a USA Baseball approved player safety standard. Step 1, pull the base paths into foul territory. Step 2, draw 2 circles stemming from the tip of home plate, radii of 45 feet and 60 feet respectively. Highlight the edge condition of your proposed field of play that fits inside the 2 rings. Step 3, take your first and third base line, whichever side you chose at the beginning, and offset it 40 feet. You've now created a 40-foot by 90-foot no-fly zone for any built infrastructure. Now you might be wondering where I came up with these numbers. Well, I ran the analysis on all 30 current MLB parks. Much like the Sun Angle video, what the big boys hold their layouts accountable to should probably be adopted at all levels. Even with gigantic dugout dimensions compared to the amateur facilities, not a single inch falls within these red rectangles. At the levels we're discussing, dugouts are rarely exceeding 50 feet in length, with most roster sizes comfortably fitting inside the 24-foot to 42-foot range. Since softball and youth baseball don't need to accommodate space for 12 part-time pitchers, part-time fungo golfers, their benches can shrink. Now, it doesn't matter which length is selected, the rules of this little game are pretty simple. The closest corner of the dugout to home plate must fall inside this light blue region. It's between the 2 rings and more than 40 feet off the foul line. You can put it here, or here, or here, or here, or even here. But remember, it's like operation. The entire dugout has to stay inside all these edges. Without these boundaries, the dugout can slide too far up the line and become an overthrow hazard, especially during half-inning warm-ups when most aren't paying attention to on-field throws. Slide too close to the backstop, and the on-deck circle becomes a scary place to stand. Even after all this is satisfied, you're still going to be judged by every coach who ever occupies the structure on one important factor. The angle in which the front face of the dugout is squared up to matters a lot. Coaches do need to see home plate, but we also like to see our infielders' defensive alignment and keep tabs on our pitchers' mechanics. And you already know this if you've sat about 3/4 of the way down the foul line at any big league game. A seat that's pointing you in the direction of about 2% of the action isn't very fun, or easy on the back to twist against the grain. So let's take this checklist and a 42 by 10 dugout to grade our 3 Goldilocks examples. First up is Central Iowa. Placed in this location, the dugout fails to keep its entire footprint out of the no-fly zone. Additionally, its angle sure does allow a coach to critique that day's strike zone, but you have to crane your neck to see any bang-bang play at first base. Even if you try to move the dugout at this facility to another corner condition that satisfies the rules, you actually make matters worse. It's still failing the 40-foot distance off the line, while the angle of the dugout has shifted from too acute to too obtuse. The severe turn of the neck is now towards home plate. And this last bullet point drives me nuts. You feel like the other team's first or third base coach is in your dugout with you. You can't strategize with your assistants as you'd like. If the game gets contentious, the proximity gets super awkward fast. The moral of the story in Central Iowa is, don't create your foul territory geometry like this. How does our next option fare? Sadly, it receives the same F+, but it takes a different way of arriving there. And now we have the porridge that is just right. We're off the line more than 40 feet and inside the 2 goalposts. I've even narrowed the one bookend to the edge of the home plate circle, and it still fits. The angle isn't parallel to the first baseline, but it isn't turning its back to the right field foul pole either. It's that happy medium, beautifully turned, but squared up to an imaginary dot between the pitcher and the catcher. The nearest corner of the dugout to home plate is 51 feet away. That means your on-deck circle is as safe as you can find at this level of play. Reminder, this is all due to selecting a backstop distance. Starting to believe some of these variables have some ripple effect? And this is my advice to you. Think out and even simulate all the different effects from one seemingly minor decision. And do it while any conflict resolution is as easy as a mouse click and a drag, not when it's $1 million renovation. As a great Greek philosopher once said, few things are brought to a successful issue by impetuous desire, but most by calm and prudent forethought.
When you're looking at building a new facility, you don't want to create something that with a few extra dollars from the very beginning could, 1, save you insurance premiums, 2, save you time and energy, 3, prevent injuries to individuals. Those are all very valid and very straightforward risk management approaches you want to consider. And if you could do that from the very beginning, that's best.
Major League Baseball is proving to us all right now that reacting to accidents is an expensive, arduous, and hackneyed approach. It's also the least visually appealing solution. Go that extra mile early, formulate a plan from the jump, and see your ROI in the form of insurance savings. Now, I'm here to say it is my opinion that the baseball rules should stay intact. But that doesn't mean we can't do more to broaden the blanket of protection provided at each facility. And this isn't advocating you go bankrupt in the name of running netting 30 feet tall around the entire perimeter of every playing surface. I've seen that done, and it's a sterile environment. Remember, these are called parks, and not the industrial kind. Build something that's one with Mother Nature, and she'll return the favor with foul ball deflection for free. Better get proactive about it now. The quantity of foul balls per game has overtaken balls put in play, and this disparity is only going to grow. Heads up!